very quickly, I want to tell you something that happened in our community in October, because the next panel is a very emotional panel, or could be a very emotional panel. It's about a very emotional topic, and it really hit home for my children and me in October. Actually, their school made Drudge, but not for a good reason. They made Drudge because there was a Columbine-like attack on their school. There was a couple of kids. They had a hit list. They had bomb-making material. They had ammunition, and they had weapons. And there was an anonymous tip line, and somebody overheard these children, these high school seniors, so I guess they're really adults almost, talking about what they intended to do at my children's high school. And someone heard it at a restaurant, called it in. The sheriff's department acted, investigated. The two students were arrested within, I think, 24, 48 hours of the tip being called in. By the end of the week, 3 more students who were stirring things up and causing a bit of hysteria on social media, saying that the students who were arrested really didn't solve, that's just a distraction. The real thing's going to happen on Friday, and scaring people. 3 people who were engaged in that on the Friday, so within a week, 5 people from the high school were arrested. 2 who were plotting harm, and 3 who were just causing trouble. I was out of town. I was here on Friday. My son went to school, stayed home, and his twin sister went to school. I was scared to death the whole day. So every time I hear about these things that happen to schools around this country, I just keep thinking, that could have been me. It's very personal, very, very personal. And yet it wasn't, because in my my the sheriff acted, and they acted swiftly, and they stopped very bad things from happening. And they didn't compromise our rights while they did it. Our next panel is going to be about securing schools without compromising rights. Phil Watson from the Firearms Policy Coalition is going to be moderating the panel. The people who we have coming up here have been deeply affected by violence, either in their own family or in their community. And these are very real people, and I appreciate the fact that they are here. We have Leader Patrick Neville, who is the Colorado House Minority Leader, and he's a survivor of Columbine, and he's now a pro-Second Amendment legislator. You can come on and sit down. Next, we have Kenneth Preston. He is a Broward County student journalist. Broward County is where Parkland, Florida is, who uncovered $100 million in unspent school safety funds that could have saved lives at Stoneman Douglas. He's now working with Andrew Pollack, bringing safety to schools across the country through their nonprofit Americans for Class. Next, we have J.T. Lewis, who I actually met through Twitter about the same time that I met Will. He is the brother of a Sandy Hook shooting victim. His name was Jessie Lewis. J.T. was 12 at the time of the shooting, and has recently been focused on hardening schools through measures such as armed guards. He and his family have worked with the Obama and Trump administrations to find solutions. And finally, Hunter Pollack. He's a Second Amendment advocate. He's a co-founder of Americans for Class, and he's the brother of Meadow Pollack, who was murdered in the Parkland, Florida school shooting. And Phil, do you want to come on up, because you're doing the moderation?
right. So my name is Phil Watson with the Firearms Policy Coalition. First of all, I'd like to thank Jenny Beth Martin for having the intestinal fortitude to call this panel and invite everyone here and invite me to moderate. There's a lot of different groups around the country that would not want to cover this subject or give certain people that are on the panel today an opportunity to speak. I think we can all agree that's wrong. I think everybody has a right to have their side and their perspective heard. So I think we'll just start with right here next to me, and we'll move to the right. And each person is going to tell their story for a couple minutes, and after that, we're going to have a panel discussion with some pointed questions, and each of the panelists will get an opportunity to touch on that topic. So, Patrick, do you want to kick us off?
Certainly. Well, thank you everyone for being here. This is obviously, like was said earlier, difficult and emotional subject. I mean, for me, I'll never forget April 20th, 1999. After the Columbine shooting, what we did is we gathered up at the elementary school that was nearby us. And it was actually the elementary school that I went to since I was a little kid. And we gathered up there, and that's where all the friends started meeting friends to see who was okay. Parents started picking their kids up, and of course we were swamped by reporters all over. And what happened was, as students started getting rescued from the high school, they would bus them in to the elementary school. And the crowd was at first really large, but eventually parents started picking up their students, and the reporters went home to go turn in their stories, and the crowd started thinning out. And I'll never forget a father came up to me. It was a father I'd known since I was probably in about second grade. Coached my soccer teams, my baseball teams. I was on those teams with his son, and he came up to me and asked me if I'd seen his son. I'll never forget the fear and the anguish in his eyes, and he never got to see his son alive ever again. I'll never forget, after we started back up school, we were told in English class, go ahead and get in your groups, break into your groups. We did all these projects in groups of 3. And it was that moment I realized I didn't have a group. The 2 other students, one was murdered and the other one was still in the hospital. And to be honest with you all, that day and the times after that certainly shaped me. I was not a good kid. I was doing every dumb decision that a 15-year-old kid could do. I was making the wrong decision, doing the wrong thing. And so that day definitely turned me around, because I looked at the people that we lost, and quite frankly, they were better human beings than I was. And so I decided to change my life around, and that's a big reason I went into the service. I mean, I deployed to Sadr City, Iraq, when my oldest daughter was just days old. Of course, Iraq was tough, but it didn't get any easier when we got home. I had a warrant officer in my platoon that succumbed to his wounds, and I'll never forget going and picking up his family and taking them to the airport so they could greet family coming in, and hearing the cries of his daughters. Mommy, I miss Daddy. I'll never forget giving the order to go tell a father that his son paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom and our liberty. And I tell you this because I find it ironic that the left's only solution is to basically stomp on the memories of those sacrifices that I served with following Columbine. And for what? It's not realistic. Their solutions aren't realistic. They haven't stopped anything. Columbine happened in the middle of an assault weapons ban. They focus on the one inanimate object, the gun. No one's talking about the propane tanks. There were 2 propane tanks at Columbine High School. If those would have went off, I probably wouldn't be here speaking to you today. They want to push gun confiscation orders that only focus on the gun, yet still let a deranged lunatic drive a truck full of explosives. They don't want to focus on that aspect. And then, of course, there's my biggest pet peeve, the ludicrous signs that they put up at schools saying this is a gun-free zone that I think only target criminals. So I think it's time that we get serious. I think there's some major steps that we can take forward. The first step doesn't require any legislation or any policy, but it's something that we can do collectively. And I use that word carefully in this group. I'm sure we don't like the word collective in this group. But let's first and foremost, let's stop using the killers' names. Let's not make them famous. Let's let them die the cold, lonely death that they deserve. Second, let's empower teachers. Let's stop criminalizing them. Let's tear down those ridiculous signs and remove the idiotic laws that prevent good teachers from actually protecting our students. Third, let's harden the sites. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to every school and every building and every district, but let's promote hardened sites. That could be tempered glass, that could be school resource officers. Let's do that. Let's actually protect our kids. And then finally, let's empower our parents. Let's give parents the ability to move their kids from an environment that they feel is unsafe and possibly toxic for the kids. Let's release the shackles that's basically placed on our children's education and empower parents to move them where the kids are best fit and where the kids can best learn. I'm privileged to be up here, privileged with you gentlemen. It takes a lot of courage to speak out. I get it. The media attention doesn't really like to go to this point of view and these types of solutions. So, gentlemen, I am honored to be up here with you.
It's great to be with you again, Patrick.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. Kenneth has a presentation that goes along with his
I'll just let you know.
his talk, and he'll let us know when he wants us to see it. Okay.
Hi everyone. I'm Kenneth. After the shooting, I got involved with Andrew Pollack and a lot of the other families in basically trying to figure out these sort of systematic failures that occurred that allowed what happened at Stoneman to happen. And you can go ahead and play the clip. It's just
Okay.
try to sort of understand why I got involved.
Okay.
To me, reaching out to staff, probably board members and others, saying that now is the time for this country to have a real conversation on sensible gun control laws in this country. So our students are asking for that conversation. And I hope we can get it done in this generation, but if we don't, they will.
So basically, to most, that would just seem like an impassioned plea for gun control. It wasn't. While he gave that speech and he was asking for more gun control, a girl that I knew in debate, a kid that I used to swim with, their bodies were still on the floor of the school behind him. Right, that was less than 24 hours after the shooting. And that was heartbreaking, and it was that day that I decided that I would work every day of my life to make sure that man never held elected office again. So that's what I did. And so I decided that I was just going to have the worst week of my life and pour through thousands and thousands of pages of government documents, do some research, and what I found was kind of heartbreaking. There was about $100 million in school safety funds that had accumulated over a 4-year period that they never spent. About $1 million of those dollars was supposed to go specifically to Stoneman Douglas for a new system, a fire alarm system for the 3rd floor. Basically what that means is if you pull the alarm, or in this case gun smoke triggered it, that alarm wouldn't immediately go off. The office would first have to determine whether it was an actual fire. On the 3rd floor, 6 students were killed and 3 were injured. One of them was Hunter's sister because they ran out as that fire alarm went off. Had that system been implemented on time 4 years ago, none of those students on the 3rd floor would have died, not a single one of them. When I asked the superintendent why it hadn't been implemented, he told me it would have cost a little bit more to implement at the time. And as a result, now we have 6 broken families. And that sort of ridiculous failure has been pretty consistent with the response that the district has been giving. Another family, Carmen Schentrup, when she was killed, our superintendent that you saw there went to her family's home about 2 days after her burial and told her parents that the district had done everything right, that there wasn't a single failure that took place, and that he would do whatever he could to help her family. And then all of a sudden, Carmen comes and asks him, she said, I need time off as a principal, right? I need time to grieve my daughter's death. So what he said, being a principal is not a part-time job, and they docked her pay while she mourned her daughter's death. Anthony Borges, who was shot 5 or 6 times, shielding his classmates from bullets, and survived. His family was given a $100 check by the school board, but $20 for every bullet wound. So there have just been colossal failures on every level. But there are some solutions, and that's what we've been working on. Hunter, I, and Andrew have been working tirelessly on his nonprofit, which is called Americans for Class. The point of that is a few things. One would be school safety. Look, we've talked to Secret Service, we've talked to security guards all over the place. There are 3 measures you can take right now that would mitigate about 90% of school shootings. You have a single point of entry. At that single point of entry, there's one single metal detector, and there's an armed guard. That's it. Done, right? There's no question about it. There's no debate. That would mitigate the vast majority of school shootings. And in addition to that, it's local school board races, local county races, municipal races are incredibly important. So we've been working on replacing our school board, making sure that the loon you saw on there is thrown out of office, and look, it's a day-by-day process, but it's just incredibly important because we have a moral responsibility at this point to seek justice for those 17 that were lost, and that's what all of us are trying to do. So thank you, guys.
So, JT, I want you to get ready here. But Kenneth, what was the reaction of your school district and school board to you exercising your First Amendment rights?
They're not my biggest fans. Well, first, they came out, they called me fake news, said that I was damaging to the district, saying that I was exploiting bloodshed for personal gain. And 2 months later, I was vindicated when they came out and they said, oh, by the way, yeah, that kid was part of that program that you mentioned. And yeah, that money wasn't spent. And then they kicked me out of school. 2 weeks prior to graduation, I was kicked out of every school in the district, which is 330 different schools. And I am not, even though I've already been accepted to colleges, so on and so forth, I cannot attend them because my school is refusing to issue me a diploma. So we're suing them. But it's a... Yeah. Day by day.
All right, thank you, Kenneth. JT, thank you for being here. Go ahead.
Sure, I'm going to read my remarks. Thank you for having me today to talk about how we can secure our schools without compromising our rights. First, I'm sharing the stage with some pretty amazing people, Hunter Pollock and Kenneth Preston. Louder. Is it working? They continue to make invaluable strides toward making our schools safe. Also, thank you, Kelly and Jenny, for inviting me to speak here. It's an amazing group of people up here who are leaving an impactful solutions to the school violence problem we're seeing in America. And more importantly, it's an amazing group in the crowd today who want to be part of the solution. I'm glad this organization is putting a special focus on making schools safe. To put it bluntly, talk about school shootings dies down in the summer. Media coverage and therefore public recognition of the crisis fades during these months because there aren't any new school shootings to report on. So to be able to speak today is very important. Let me tell you a little bit about how I ended up here. Almost 6 years ago today, I was huddled with fellow classmates in the back of a classroom while my brother was gunned down in the nearby elementary school. None of us, no one, could have possibly fathomed the extent of the destruction occurring only miles away. My school was placed on lockdown, everyone, including teachers, on their phones trying to figure out what information they could. As rumors were confirmed, we started to realize how serious what had happened at the elementary school really was. There was a death toll. Most of us recognized names. As soon as the lockdown at my middle school had ended, I was picked up by a family member and chauffeured to the now famous firehouse. Located next to the elementary school, this is where families gather to find out if their children and parents were alive or not. About an hour into the wait, someone casually walked over to our family and told us we fell into the category of not. Since my brother was killed in the Sandy Hook shooting, I've watched politicians and citizens alike struggle to figure out how to prevent these shootings. All they could muster was the same old gun control talk, which we've been hearing for decades, yet in all that time we've seen no results. But there is a new movement growing, and it's not gun control, it's school safety. People are waking up to the lie called gun control. I'm seeing it around the country, schools starting to add security measures in lieu of wasting their time on the failed gun control movement. In the years following the shooting, we met with former Secretary of Education, we met with governors, we met with senators, we even met with President Obama, the whole time hoping someone, anyone, would help us stop these senseless killings. No one helped. The shootings continued. Nothing changed. They accomplished nothing. These politicians could never veer from their party's anti-gun agenda to actually make schools safe. Our country is built on the foundation of the Second Amendment. Our right to keep and bear arms isn't about hunting. It's about protecting ourselves and those we love when our government can't or will not. My activism really took form after Parkland happened. I was inspired by the kids who took center stage in the gun control debate. Not because I agreed with them, but frankly, I felt sorry for them. They were hurting. They lost friends and family, and they wanted to make something positive out of their loss. I could relate, so I started advocating for something more doable, more common sense than gun control. I don't have a special affinity with guns. I didn't grow up around them, but I recognize that whether we like it or not, they're not going anywhere. My mom started the Jesse Lewis Choose Love movement, which provides a free social and emotional learning program to schools. Finally, a program that, along with asking how we can stop these shootings, asks why someone would want to carry out a shooting in the first place. It's now in schools in all 50 states and 54 countries. In fact, it'll be in every school in Mexico in a decade. And if I'm reading my audience correctly, I'm guessing you guys don't want to get beaten by Mexico, right? It's truly an amazing program, and I encourage everyone to go to the website because I'm not going to do it justice talking about it up here. Hunter and his father, Andrew, started Americans for Class, which focuses on how to secure schools and keep the kids safe. These solutions focus on stopping a shooter and minimizing the damage. The Jesse Lewis Choose Love movement is more long-term, focusing on how to change the culture. Both are essential in the equation and go hand in hand to prevent not only school shootings, but all shootings and violence in general. Hunter and Kenneth are rooting out the corruption in Broward, and let me tell you, we need them in Sandy Hook too. In Newtown, there were no guards. There was no security at all. The shooter freely walked right through the front door. Today in my town, we have some of the safest schools in the country. That's because only after a shooting do most schools put in the necessary security to keep kids safe. How about we be a little proactive and go ahead and make schools safe before it's even needed? People ask, do you wish there had been an armed guard at Sandy Hook Elementary School? My response is, how can anyone be against armed guards? If there was one in that school that day, my brother would very well be alive right now. President Trump recently tweeted, and don't worry, it's a good one. History shows that a school shooting lasts on average 3 minutes. It takes police and first responders 5 to 8 minutes to get to the site of the crime. Highly trained, gun-adept teachers and coaches would solve the problem instantly before police arrive. Some argue that putting armed guards in schools makes them feel like prisons. It's a ridiculous argument. After 9/11, airports added extensive security. At first, it felt odd, but after time passed, people grew used to additional security because it was for their own safety. The same is true with schools. We can implement armed guards, metal detectors, and in time we'll grow used to it because it's for the safety of our nation's youth. Many of the more recent shootings in Florida, not Parkland, Maryland, and Illinois were stopped by school resource officers. They were able to quickly apprehend the shooters in all 3 cases. There was 1 death combined in those shootings. That compared to Newtown, Parkland, and Columbine, where there were a combined 56 deaths and countless more injured. Obviously, having a first line of defense inside of our schools works. How hypocritical it is that many of our politicians go around with a full security detail, armed to the teeth, while our kids are sitting ducks in outdated and unprepared schools. What if those same politicians valued the lives of our nation's youth as equally as their own? The president said it best, we must harden schools. It's that obvious, it's that simple. We're seeing more and more attacks on our Constitution and against the values this country was founded on. So actively defend the Constitution, because if you don't, we may lose it. One thing I still can't quite wrap my brain around is the left's insistence on turning in our guns to the government. First, they tell us the president is a Nazi, a fascist, a wannabe dictator, hell-bent on overthrowing our democracy. Then they go and tell everyone to give him our guns. If only they knew that's what the Second Amendment was actually written for, a situation just like they described. Gun control has turned out to be nothing more but a political bargaining chip. Democrats have proved through the years of inaction that they really don't want anything of substance accomplished because it's an issue to run on and raise money on. On top of that, it's an impossible task to achieve. Guns are permanent in the United States, whether we like it or not. Over 300 million of them, one per citizen. Let me ask what you think would happen if government goes knocking on doors in Texas telling everyone to hand in their guns. War. Schools are legally not responsible for the safety of their students. The Newtown school system was not accountable for my brother, and they walked away without even an apology to the 26 victims' families. We need to step in and make sure every school in America is as secure as post-shooting Newtown schools are. As Hunter and his father say, hold them accountable. Most shooters are looking for attention. In a recently released video, the Parkland shooter says, "When you see me on the news, you'll know who I am." And the news stations across party lines indulge him and every other mass shooter. They post their name and face all over the country and make them famous. It's disgusting, and it's actually been proven they're creating the next shooter. Recently, as I understand, the Tea Party Patriots helped facilitate the Stand for the Second march. Now, let me be clear, I'm not a huge fan of marches. I find them to be problematic and actually set issues back. That being said, it's nice to see one of these marches where the participants are rallying for their rights rather than against them. Another aspect of school safety missing from most towns where shootings occur is communication. Communication within the community is key. Programs like the Promise program hurt that communication because trouble cases go unchecked. Parkland's a great example of the breakdown of communication. Out of all the agencies that had run-ins with that kid, if just one had followed up, the whole tragedy could have been prevented. In Newtown, the shooter literally wrote stories about shooting kids in class in the same school he later shot up. His teacher, the schools, no one did anything. Have kids talk off the record. They'll tell you who the threat is. In Newtown and Parkland and many other instances, few were surprised by who the shooter was, and some even predicted it. Simple measures like anonymous hotlines to report threats seem as obvious as they are necessary. If you ask, and I have, most kids will tell you they know who the next shooter is. And finally, it's important everyone knows schools aren't legally liable for kids. It's our job, the parents' job, to make sure they're safe. Immune to any lawsuit for neglecting protocol, which they did, Newtown walked away without so much as a sorry for leaving our schools unprotected and allowing my brother and 25 others to be shot and killed. Parents are starting to wake up to the fact that when their kids are at school, they, the parents, are solely responsible for their safety. They're demanding action and change, and I'm standing with them as they do. Thank you for having me to speak today. Let's save lives.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you. I prefer to speak standing up. It's just something OCD I have. So I'm going to tell you my story. February 14th is a day that I will never forget. I awoke on the day of love, wishing everyone a happy Valentine's Day. I was anxiously getting ready for my math test, which was later that day. I was 6.5 hours away from home at Florida State University. After my math test, I saw on Twitter that there were shots fired at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. I immediately received a feeling like I had never experienced before. A shock was sent through my body and I began to shake. I sent a text to my little sister Meadow, who was a senior there, saying, "What's up?" I thought she would respond like normally, but she did not. After not hearing anything from her, I began to panic. My family began to panic too. We all started group chats, shared posts on Facebook, announced that Meadow was missing, had news stations show her photo, and went to sites where survivors were going. Still, we heard nothing. My cousin Jake, who also attended Florida State University, was by my side through these dark hours. Around 9 p.m. that night, we both decided it was time to drive home. A brutal 6-hour drive like none other. It was a quiet car ride. I looked out the window crying for hours. It was tough for me to even speak. Finally, around 2 a.m., we arrived in Parkland. We walked into the house, and my whole family was sitting on the couch. They all looked worn out from searching for Meadow. At 2:30 a.m., 2 Broward County homicide detectives walked in the house telling us that they needed to speak with us. All of our fears became a reality as they announced to my family, Meadow is dead. My mom ran out of the house screaming, "My baby can't be dead," as I chased her down the street. My family couldn't even believe what had happened. I was strong for everyone else, although my life changed forever. A week later, we received a phone call telling us that President Trump had invited our family to the White House for a listening session. With pleasure, we accepted the invitation under one circumstance. Our family requested a private meeting with him. Once that was agreed to, we flew out to D.C. After arriving at the airport, we changed in Brooks Brothers, then headed to the Department of Education. We arrived for a meeting with Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. She was really accepting and open to hearing ideas. After our brief meeting, we set out for the White House. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's truly amazing, was the first cabinet member to introduce herself to us. She, along with other White House staff members, walked us right into the Oval Office. Sitting at the desk, there he was, President Trump and Vice President Pence. It was such an honor to be in the Oval Office, the holiest place in our entire country. We sat down at his desk. The first thing the president did was sign my brother's MAGA hat, and then we all looked at pictures of Meadow together. He then deeply expressed his condolences and said, "What would you like us to do? What would you like to see be done?" We went back and forth with ideas on how to secure our schools. He later invited us into a room where the White House had a listening session for school safety. After listening to survivors of other school shootings, it was my family's turn to speak. This was the moment my father, Andrew Pollack, shocked the world. My father stood up with the president saying, "We as a country failed our children." He told us that we should come together not as parties but as humans. How many schools, how many children need to get shot? I'm going to fix it. I'm not going to rest. He then carried on saying there should have been one school shooting and we should have fixed it. And I'm pissed. This dramatic moment brought us into the political world. Over the past few months, we were unraveling the corruption of Broward County. My great friend, who I made sure was here today, Kenneth, discovered the school board had $100 million allocated towards school safety that wasn't spent. This just shows the school board's incompetency. If the money had been spent cautiously, Parkland schools could have had more school resource officers, metal detectors, better surveillance, and even a fire alarm that could have saved my sister. The fire alarm that was supposed to be put in would have put a delay of up to 180 seconds. If trained personnel could acknowledge the alarm at the control panel, within 15 seconds, my sister would have not run out of her class because the alarm would have never went off. This could have stopped it. Superintendent Robert Runcie called this fake news. He suggested we reach out to Florida Tax Watch, which is, of course, what we did. And the VP agreed with the numbers in Kenneth's research. The disciplinary programs brought into Broward County allowed the killer, who we refer to by prison number 181958, to slip through the cracks. In 2013, Superintendent Robert Runcie, along with Coward of Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel, to sign an agreement to consider alternatives to arrest when dealing with troubled students. Under the new programs, if a student commits a misdemeanor, the officer may consider placing the student under arrest. They brought this program in as an effort to decrease the school-to-prison pipeline. And that goes back to the Obama administration. All of a sudden, the crime in Broward schools went from one of the worst arrest rates, in fact, the worst arrest rate, to the 60th county in Florida, and we have 67 counties. It's not because kids weren't getting in trouble. It's because the school board stopped arresting kids. Despite 1958 threatening to rape and kill students, bringing bullets to school, being involved in fights and vandalizing property, and having countless encounters with administration, he was arrested or Baker acted, which would have prevented him from ever even getting close to buying a gun. When asked if the killer were ever in the Promise program, Runcie said the killer never had any connection to Promise while in high school. With his Harvard degree, Runcie might have thought he was clever enough to trick us, but it didn't work. We knew he was referred to Promise in middle school, which the superintendent came out weeks later saying, 1958 showed up and never completed this assignment. He got away with it. These disciplinary programs allowed troubled students to walk the same hallways as regular students, who are now at risk of these violent acts. 1958 even went to Cross Creek Alternative School, and Marjory Stoneman Douglas allowed him to return, so as long as he did not wear a backpack. What kind of joke is that? Marjory Stoneman Douglas had the biggest cowards working at the school the day of the shooting. It starts with security monitor Andrew Medina, who could have stopped the killer moments before the killing spree began. Medina said he saw, in quotations, crazy boy get out of an Uber and walk on the campus with a rifle bag. Nope. Medina also said he had previously been in a meeting where it was speculated that 1958 might be the one that perpetrated a school shooting. Medina chased him into the 1200 building, but didn't do anything to stop him. The first thing he did was call another unarmed security guard, who later hid inside of a closet. Medina decided not to call a code red, which would have locked down the school. It would have put the students, including my sister, on notice. Instead, what he did was drive away and grab SRO Scott Peterson, who he then dropped off outside of the building. Peterson heard gunshots inside the building. He then went up to the door and retreated to hide behind a concrete wall while kids were slaughtered down. While my sister was murdered, this coward did nothing to try and save her life. He's the biggest failure of a police officer if you've ever seen one. The sheriff didn't fire this officer and allowed him to retire with a pension of over $8,000 a month. The school board made no attempt to fire Andrew Medina either, until my father and I decided to go to the principal and told him how disrespectful it was to the families that this man was still employed. That's when he was finally fired. This same coach had been reported by multiple girls for sexual harassment as well, including one being my beautiful sister. It was time for us to make sure the state of Florida would do something to secure schools after the MSD tragedy that killed 17 people. After building a relationship with Governor Rick Scott and Attorney General Pam Bondi, I was positive we would be able to get something done. Senate Bill 7026, the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, which was the state was able to derive. After reviewing the bill, my family, which focused only on the school safety aspects, agreed with most of it. We wanted a program where schools can have armed guards, which is common sense. We came up with the Aaron Feist Guardian program, named after the fallen football coach, which would provide ex-law enforcement and veterans the opportunity to go through 132 hours of training. The requirements are that you must pass a drug test and the mental health evaluation. An individual must also possess a concealed carry license. They would be responsible to act if an active shooter came on campus, which is common sense because police take 5 to 7 minutes, sometimes more depending on how rural the area is, to actually get to the scene. Plus, these cowards don't even show up if they know someone's going to shoot back at them. They would be a total sum of $400 million was funded to this bill. My father and I went to Tallahassee to watch this bill receive vote. It barely passed the Senate, and then it was time to pass the House. A lot of Republicans wanted to vote no on the bill because it contained aspects of gun reform, that my family did not encourage. And Democrats wanted to vote no because they were afraid of teachers being armed, which as well we did not encourage. Every representative that was going to vote no had to meet with us in a conference room. We lobbied these politicians. We told them that what the bill meant to my family. Along with Ryan Petty, whose daughter had also died, we had heated arguments with politicians and were successful in swinging a lot of votes. It came time for the vote. The bill passed. My father received a standing ovation from members of the House. We just got a huge school safety bill signed in a record amount of time. Thank you. We celebrated with dinner at the governor's house. What I emphasize to people is that before we go and fixing the entire country, we must fix it at home first. I've been in contact with some MSD survivors who are on the road to change. Even though it's great what they're doing, I don't agree with them. We need accountability at home, not personal fame. My weekly phone call tells them that we can set the example in Broward County for the entire country August 28th, which is the first school board election after the tragedy. I tell them they must get involved. My family and Kenneth has been working tirelessly with Dr. Richard Mendelson, who is running for District 6 against Lori Rich Levinson, whose mom is an incumbent Democrat who's been a career politician, and it's about time we get them both out of office. We're knocking on doors, we're making phone calls, we're passing out flyers, and speaking at events with them. When we get Dr. Mendelson elected, we will hold the school board accountable. My family and I will not stop until not only every child in Broward County schools are safe, but until every child in the entire country is safe. Parents need to know that when they drop their child off at the beginning of the day, that they will pick them up at the end of it. Everyone from Parkland have gone down different paths on what needs to be fixed. Now is a great time for everyone to be united. We must work together. This is such an amazing opportunity to be able to speak about the tragedy my family has suffered. Every day we are actively fighting against the evil of this political correctness that got my sister killed. From meeting with the president, mayors, congressmen, senators, and many more, we have been getting our point across. No teacher or child should be in danger when they should be learning and teaching. The Tea Party and his amazing movement that I've been following for quite a while. I am looking forward to answering your questions in this panel. I want to thank Kelly I want to thank Kelly so much for her hard work and for reaching out to me and being so easily accessible these last few weeks. Thank you, Kenneth, Patrick, and JT for being here today. Let's get this done.
And I'm going to pose a question here to each member of the panel, and you can take it up or defer if you want. But there was a school safety bill in Congress earlier this year that got rolled into the omnibus, and the group I am formally with, the Firearms Policy Coalition, did not endorse the bill, mainly because it did not meet many of the policy prescriptions that I've heard from our panelists here today. And we thought it was an unserious bill, really. It didn't address many of the issues that needed to be addressed. And quite frankly, I think it was sort of a quick fix for PR reasons, unfortunately. I think, in your opinion, and we'll go again in the same order from Patrick on down to
What's the name of the bill?
Mr. Pollack.
The Stop School Violence Act?
Yes. And so, in your guys' opinion, does Congress still need to act to to implement some of the policies or all of the policies that I've heard you guys mention here today?
Well, thank you for the question. I shared some similar concerns with the bill too. I think it also had some downfalls too, where it would actually increase stigma for vets seeking mental health, and the fact that all that information would be rolled into the NICS system, which I think would be what I've actually known vets that have gotten out of the service. One friend of mine specifically was bipolar when the Obama administration was sending notices out to him that he was no longer allowed to own firearms. His solution was he just stopped seeking mental health treatment. So I think we need to be careful of that. Anything that we do that actually raises the stigma of mental health is going to actually have the opposite effect. And I think the bill had some of that in that, so I had concerns in that. I think the biggest thing Congress can do is actually remove some ridiculous laws. I mean, we've got the Gun Free Zone Act. That's a federal act. I mean, there's a ways around it in the states, but my friend Congressman Thomas Massey runs a bill every year. I think Senator Rand Paul runs a similar bill too, and I think they should remove that. That would help some of the states be able to not have to do, basically bureaucratic go-arounds to get beyond that law. I think Utah's got an ability to actually that allows teachers to be armed, but they have to do it so they license the teachers, which then allows them to be compliant with the federal act. But if they just remove that, that would give us in the states some more flexibility.
Kenneth, any comment you'd like to add to that?
Sure, it's going to be short. Federal safety standards for schools. It's very easy. We met with Hunter and I met yesterday with Rubio, and what his concern was that there's going to that it's government overreach, right? That putting safety right. Look, I don't think anybody in this room is a fan of government overreach, but I think we can all agree that there are basic standards that schools should abide by, and it's not that controversial to suggest that Congress should set those federal safety standards. Because more often than not, school boards, local school boards will cut corners. They'll do whatever they can to make sure that they don't have to implement some of those standards. So federal safety standards would mitigate a lot of this.
JT?
Yeah, I'll just say, I guess it's more than that. Thanks. I'll just say there's not going to be one bill that's going to solve everything and stop every shooting. So we'll take what we can get, really. I mean, it does do some of it I don't agree with. I didn't really, support it or rally for it. But yeah, again, there's not going to be one bill that will solve all these shootings. So it'll be, a series of different bills and movements. And as Hunter, I'm sure, is about to say, it starts locally.
Hunter?
I encourage people not to rely on DC personally to make change at your schools. If you want to see change, you have to get involved with your community. You have to look up who is in your school board and what are they getting done. You need to look at their school safety guidelines and make sure they are following them. An idea my father and I have suggested is that we, like the NRA rates politicians now get school safety ratings. We have to make sure that they are prioritizing our children and that they are following these guidelines.
So yesterday we heard from my co-panelist, Alex Galardos, here today, who is one of the 3 Americans that helped stop the terrorist attack on the 15-17 to Paris. And there have been several scholars that have written about these incidents and people stopping attacks, whether they're armed or unarmed. One of these publications was called Tough Targets by the Cato Institute. Very good publication. I recommend everybody read it. Several other people have written about these things. John Lott, Gary Kleck, Eugene Volokh. So, I mean, the scholarship is out there. And there's a lot of argument in the media about it, and a lot of people get stage time sort of in the media that point certain things out. But I heard one statistic recently that really shocked me. The shootings in Europe in 1 year, about 1 year, mass shootings, quote unquote, were more than the entire 8 years of the Obama administration. Okay? And these were the quote unquote terrorist attacks in France. So when we look at that, and we add in all the other types of attacks as well, we really start seeing the disparity there between some of the comparisons that have been made in the media and by people using sort of these bogus studies with qualifiers and so on. What are some of the points that you guys don't see brought up in the media that you would like to be made here today?
As young conservatives, I think anything we think, the media doesn't want to show. Since day one of February 14th, while I was in my house grieving, we had a group of kids with CNN in front of the school vouching for gun control, along with the superintendent you saw in that video. Why is school safety not a bipartisan issue? I ask myself every day, why does the media only care to talk about guns? So I think now, which we all do, is we force them to talk about school safety. My dad's been all over Fox. He's been on Anderson Cooper. He's been on CNN, and we're going to continue to keep doing so. The media is not the way to get the message anymore, and our president has proved that.
Patrick, you and I kind of share a similar background, so to speak. Both of us were in the military, and I actually grew up right in my grandpa's house. Every day, his backyard literally was a school, and he was a World War II, Korea, and Vietnam veteran. He also had a concealed carry permit. And to think that he could have that level of training and go through all that defending our country, but yet he could go a couple of feet and not be able to defend the kids at that school should something happen. What do you have to say? I mean, what goes through your mind when we have laws like that? What do you think about that?
Well, it drives me nuts, to be frank. Look, I look at myself, all the military training I've had, everything else, and then I go and drop my kids off, and because it's a charter school, but it's a public charter school, so they're bound by our ridiculous gun-free zone laws that we have in the state of Colorado. So as long as I'm in my car, I can equip myself to protect my kids and other students around in the area. But if I step foot outside of my car onto the school grounds, I'm a criminal. It makes no sense at all. And I think you hit on it earlier that these folks, when they go in, they're cowards. They are cowards. You prove that in another country. They can be stopped. And the minute they actually face any sort of threat, they usually back down. The best way to stop these is not let these guys get famous, and that's why I said we shouldn't use their names. But you know what? What also makes them less famous? If they get taken down early and often.
As far as the media goes, Kenneth, what was the response, if any, really in the mainstream media to you exercising your First Amendment rights and pointing out some of these issues?
That's the interesting thing is what I did was completely nonpartisan, completely and entirely. And the only folks who were willing to listen were conservative outlets, conservative media, Daily Wire, so on and so forth. Because while some of the more mainstream media was satiating their appetite for a national gun debate, there were a lot of other stories to be told. So they just did a really terrible job of covering it. Local news did as well. They sided with our superintendent. One large newspaper that we have told us that unless the story was positive or we were suing the superintendent, that they would not cover it. So they've done a very poor job of covering what we've brought to light.
Okay, folks, how are we doing on time?
We've got about 15 or so minutes,
Okay.
about 15, 20.
Okay,
Depends.
great.
Sorry.
I just wanted to check real quick. So we've got some additional time. What are some of the suggestions that you've heard out there, or some of the talking points? We've heard about what you guys agree with and what you guys would like to see implemented. What do you disagree with out there, and what are some of the more I don't know what you would call it, things that you would see would not work being mentioned in the media or by people you don't agree with out there. Is there anything that you guys would like to talk about on that end of the spectrum, on the other side of the debate here?
We need to also make sure law enforcement does their job. Someone else also we're going to be holding accountable coming up is the FBI. The FBI got phone calls that this kid had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old. He had the weapons. He wanted to first kill himself, she said to the FBI. Now he wants to kill others. He wants to take out hundreds of people. So like the FBI is focused on this, let's say, witch hunt, and what a adult actress did with the president 15 years ago. Instead, now 17 children are dead. They also could have stopped this. The lady who called the FBI now calls my dad and I at least once every 2 weeks crying, saying she should have been able to stop this. She didn't do enough. But in reality, we have a politically correct FBI. Also, when you see a sign that says "see something, say something," you need to make sure law enforcement actually does something.
Anybody else?
Sure, I'll hit on one point that we see over and over. What I've seen in Colorado, at least, is this push for more funding for counselors. For me, I think the money, first and foremost, should actually go towards hardening the site, hardening the actual school itself, and then we can focus on counselors. And if we have extra resources too, we need to look at situations where we can actually just be able to let the kids have some mobility. If a kid feels unsafe and is getting picked on, and we can move that kid into a different environment, we can probably stop something from happening from the very beginning. But we need to actually open up school choice, and I think school choice will solve a lot of these problems. If I, as a parent, don't think that a school that my kids is going to is safe and doesn't have the proper procedures in place, then I can move them to a different school that does. And so whatever we can do that actually opens up choice in education, I think will solve a lot of these problems, instead of just putting money towards basically more government FTEs.
Gentlemen, I think we're going to open things up to some questions from the audience here.
Okay, I'm going to go to Alec first.
Hi. So 6 weeks after the terrorist attack that happened to me and my friends, there was a shooting at my college, Umpqua Community College in Oregon, of October 1st, 2015.
Microphone.
Hello. Hello.
There you go.
Okay, so after our terrorist attack, there was a shooting at my college, and the unusual thing about our shooting was that you were allowed to carry on our college campuses. It was legal, however, there was laws against it. Well, not laws, rules against it from the college, so most people assumed it was illegal. I carried my gun every day when I went to that school, so frankly, when I heard about the shooting, I was surprised. So my first question is, what can we do to educate people and kind of remove the stigma of guns are bad? And the second thing is, after our shooting, the sheriff refused to use the shooter's name in any interview he did. And I think that set a great standard, and I loved how Hunter over there referred to him by his inmate number, which I thought was fantastic. And I mean, I'm not a fan of laws or anything, so I don't believe we should pass a law against using their name, and that'd probably be a free speech violation. But is there anything we can do from the grassroots up to affect change to where they're not kind of memorialized in that way anymore?
Stop using news stations where they use the name and image. That's the first way to do that.
And first off, can we get a round of applause for this gentleman for his service and his courageous acts? Also, I commend your sheriff. Was he a Republican or a Democrat? Well, I commend them for giving him no notoriety, which I think is a trend set from the Columbine shooters that's been followed on from, we've seen Virginia Tech and Stoneman Douglas. And at my college, I'm a sitting duck pretty much. There's no officers, there's no security guards, and we're not allowed to carry on campus. 2 more weeks, I'm 21 years old, I could finally carry. I could get my concealed. I want to push for to be able to carry on college campuses. We have to protect ourselves and not rely on other people.
Anybody else?
Anyone else want to comment on that? I'm gonna go right here because I don't think you've asked a question yet.
Hi, my name's Janice Chester. I'm a psychiatrist, and I think you've all hit the nail on the head when you talk about that all these people, most of these mass killings are either terrorists or they're, pardon the expression, lunatics. And when their stories come out, even if you don't mention their names, there's always a clear-cut history of, they leave a lot of breadcrumbs behind. And it seems like nobody ever, it was most obvious, at your high school, but they all fall through the cracks, even though there's laws in place where they could have been arrested or they could have been committed. They would have been institutionalized one way or the other. They would have ended up on the NICS list, etc. And instead, what most of the local governments are doing is passing these red flag laws that you mentioned, where they basically cut, if somebody says you're dangerous, they leave you at home, with access to everything else, from your fists to a pressure cooker, a car, you name it.
Or the black market.
But they take your guns away. And it's a real gray zone because they don't even go on the NICS list. And yet everybody feels like they've done something. And unfortunately, the NRA has switched positions on these red flag laws, and now they're behind them too. So I was wondering what you all think of that, because I feel like we need to just go back to enforcing the laws we have.
I'm going to touch on that real quick and then open it up. The thing that our group saw that was faulty with a lot of these so-called red flag laws was several things. Just like you said, the person's left alone to do whatever, whenever they want after the gun is supposedly taken away from the situation. That's just not a situation that we think will lead to success either way when you talk about future incidents with these people. There's no mandatory psychological intervention from any professionals, any law enforcement mandatory investigation at all. Also, a lot of these red flag laws are what they call ex parte hearings. It's legalese for secret and one-sided. So it's a bit of a gray area there when we're talking about your right to due process. So we have some issues with those laws, and whether they work or not has yet to be seen. But I think there's some serious issues there, and they're not addressing the real issue, which is actually the person and whether or not they're a threat. If there's no mandatory follow-up, no mandatory counseling, no mandatory evaluation or commitment or investigation by law enforcement, what good is it? It's sort of one of these glossy things that sounds good in a 1 second soundbite. Red flag, ooh, that sounds cool, so I'll be for it. What a lot of politicians think, but they don't think beyond that. I'm curious what some of our panelists think. Patrick?
So in our state, we had a group of Republicans that actually pushed what I think was probably one of the more heinous red flag laws we saw throughout the state or throughout the country. It had the ex parte, it had all that in there, so you have no right to your own self-defense. Some judge, and it could have been someone who has a personal relationship with the person's girlfriend, it could be whatever, makes the claim, and then in secret a judge issues an order and you lose one of your basic constitutional rights. It was really bad. Luckily, the NRA actually helped us defeat it, so I'm very thankful for that. I think we've seen different versions. What I've heard from the NRA specifically is there's one version in Arizona that doesn't actually focus on the guns themselves, but it's more of a 72-hour hold type of situation, and they actually supported that. That's what we've kind of argued for, is that if it's too hard, the clear and imminent danger to place a 72-hour hold on an individual, then maybe let's see how we can do that to actually give law enforcement more tools. But then beyond the 72-hour hold, what we had in Colorado was a problem that after the 72-hour hold, there was nothing. So you could do a 72-hour hold, and then a lot of times the people wanted more help, and they were just basically thrown on the street with, like, literally not a jacket or anything. You're just, once the 72-hour hold is done, see you later, good luck. So we actually passed a bill that covers some of those gaps in services for individuals who actually want them. Because what happens with a lot of people after a 72-hour hold, is my understanding, and I'm sure you probably know better than me, is they go in there kind of fighting it, but then once they're there, they start having a kind of come to Jesus moment, and they actually want services, and they actually want to seek that help. And so whatever we can do to, again, try to relieve some of that stigma. And one of the things, too, that is also pushed in Colorado, at least, was there's this group called Mental Health Colorado, which is ran by the former Democrat Speaker of the House, and they kept saying, mental health wants this, mental health wants this. Well, I met with the largest, actually, public provider of mental health, and they were against it, but the media never even covered that. And they were against it because, again, like I said earlier, they thought that it actually increased the stigma, that people that actually want to seek mental health would be afraid of doing so because they thought one of their basic fundamental rights would be taken from them. So I think they're very, very dangerous laws that we have to be very careful of.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions, but first we need to say goodbye for now to JT. He has a meeting he needs to get to, so let's tell him thank you for being here. Okay, and we've got time for a couple of more questions.
Hi, my question is really mostly for Patrick. As a gun owner, one of the things that I really get frustrated with, and a concealed carry permit holder, I get very frustrated with is the real ignorance of the media and a lot of Republican senators or whatever when it comes to guns. They wouldn't know a Glock from an AR. They think an AR is an assault rifle, and I could just go on and on and on the ignorance of firearms. And I would be thrilled if the government, instead of paying for kids to have condoms, they would pay for kids to have basic firearm understanding and knowledge, and that would be promoted on TV. Instead of ads against the NRA, promote, firearm education and, know what's going on and that kind of thing. The women's group that I belong to, the Well-Armed Woman, we're going to be doing a seminar where, for example, okay, you own, I own like 5 firearms, okay, but, I don't own a Ruger. Okay, so if something happens and I'm picking up a Ruger off the ground, do I know what to do with it? Do I know how to clear it? What do I know? And that's my responsibility as a firearm owner to know that kind of stuff, I feel. And so education is one issue. Prior to 1967, by the way, you could pick up a Montgomery Ward catalog, order a firearm out of it, the ammo and the clips, and the United States Postal Service would deliver it to your door. That's how much our fear of firearms has escalated over the years. And so education is my one question, and then the second question has to do with the motive of the shooter. Colonel Grossman, I don't know if you're familiar with Colonel.
Very. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think
you know
all the
the
gunnies
book.
in the room just got a smile.
Yeah, Assassination
Sheep
Generation
dog.
is his latest book, and the motive, everything. It's violent video games, and no one will go after these bastards. That's who's training our kids to kill. And the reason they won't is because of the money. The video game industry, this is out of Grossman's book, has more revenue in 1 year than the entire music and movie industry combined. Now, if you can wrap your brain about, that's the kind of dollars we're talking about. And yet, I mean, we're not going to outlaw the violent video games, but there's a lot that can be done, again, so that parents know what garbage their kids are watching. And also, not just the garbage, because they're not only extremely violent, but sexual in nature. But also, I mean, he gives examples in his book. These kids have the highest hit ratio. I'm sorry, I'm done. But the question, I guess it's the education, number one, and going after, I mean, having these video game people be held accountable for what they manufacture.
So I would say education, I think, is really important. I mean, the first thing I ever learned was the 4 rules, right? You learn the 4 rules of firearm safety. The beauty about those is you get one right, and no one gets hurt. And I think that would be the very simplest place to start. I think the NRA has a good program, too, is the Eddie Eagle program. I think that's a great program that should be promoted. But I'm a big believer in school choice, so I wouldn't want to mandate the curriculum on any different school. But that's definitely how I teach my children. And then I think the counteract the whole video game mentality. I think that's the part of the problem, is that we don't deter these. The president's specific quote to me was, a gun-free zone to a killer or someone who wants to be a killer is like going in for the ice cream. So to them, they think the video game mentality is going to be real, that they're not going to actually be facing any deterrent. And if we actually prove out there that there's going to be deterrence there, and they're going to face, rough men ready to do harm on someone else's behalf or for someone else's safety, that they're not going to think that, oh, this is just another video game that I can go in. They're going to think, man, if I go in, I might get shot without even getting a bullet off myself. That doesn't sound too enticing to a criminal.
And I wanted to bring you up to date, actually. Steam Games just released an active shooter video game where you could be a perpetrator, walk into school and shoot at children running around. And I, myself, and my family actually were able to get the game not to be released. So
Okay, we have time for one more question for our panel. I know everybody wants
we
to
love this group.
keep asking you guys questions.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Each and every one of your stories has touched my heart. As a 30-some-odd year recovering addict and alcoholic, I would like to say that I know what it was like to be in high school, skip school, go out, get drunk, hang with the wrong crowd, and hide it from my family. I know what it's like that my friends who have ended up in prison for life, friends who took other people's lives, friends who overdosed, and it all started with drugs. It started with the little things leading to the larger things. My question is, if we don't get in school, or my statement might be, that if we don't get in school and talk to these children about the bad things that are the repercussions, the thugs are the ones going on the streets who didn't shoot your child in the school and grabbing them off the streets and doing human trafficking. And I believe that it all starts in the schools and education, which you all are very informative, and I will take a lot of this back and try to do something with it. Thank you.
Do you have children in school right now?
Unfortunately, I've never been able to have children.
We need people like you with past experience who have learned from their lessons to reach out into their communities and go to these high schools and speak to these children and tell them your story and how they could fix their problems.
Hey, before, I just wanted to say that we don't necessarily have the time for you to answer this, but I want to make sure that I have all of your email addresses and everything. Yes. I want you to send me steps that people can take to support your efforts, what you guys are all working on, all the kind of various aspects that you're working on, from either the gun-free zone aspect, the investigative journalism aspect, the hardening the schools aspect, all of it. Send those to me, because we're going to send a follow-up email to all the attendees and all of our other members that weren't able to be here, because I know that people after this are going to want to get involved and support what you're doing. So send it to me, and I'll make sure everybody gets it.
And
okay?
before I get off stage, can we get a round of applause for Jenny and Kelly for the hard work they put in this event?
you guys for being here.
Are we?
We're wrapping it up.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again, guys. And I think every one of you is going to stick around for a while here. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to break for now. But I think we're going to break for a minute, and we've got Congressman Louis Gohmert coming up in a little while. So don't go anywhere.